Let me say, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that the next 2 decades will be crucial and decisive for our country. We would either become the preeminent nation in Africa and one of the world's leading economies, or we may become one of the greatest socio-economic disasters in history if we are not careful. Why? With our population growing at almost 3% a year, we will by the year 2050 become the world's 3rd most populous country. Almost 70% of that number, almost 7% of our number will be young people under the age of 25. The implications of that for education, for healthcare, and especially for jobs, all of us can just imagine. Secondly, with climate change leading to desertification at a frightening rate, fertile land is shrinking and the struggle for pasture and water is getting more desperate and more deadly every day. Today we talk about farmer-herdsman clashes, especially in the north central region. This is essentially a struggle for pasture and water, and it's getting increasingly desperate every day because of the desertification. Lake Chad, which used to be over 35,000 square meters in the 1960s, is now 1,350 square meters. It has shrunk, and it is shrinking every day, from 35,000 square meters to 1,350. Lake Chad used to be a place where so many communities got their resources. They were able to feed their cattle, feed their animals. They were able to use the water for irrigation, and they fished in the water as well. Today, all of those communities around the Lake Chad are desperately in search of resources. And this is continuing with climate change. Thirdly, there is a rise in terrorism and terrorist activities, especially along our northern borders. And when I speak of our northern borders, I'm talking of the northern borders between Nigeria and other countries in the sub-region, in the northern part of the country. Especially with the emergence of ISIS West Africa, giving rise to dislocation of whole communities in the sub-region, many of them coming into Nigeria. So we have a rise in terrorism. And the reason why there's a rise in terrorism is also because of terrorist activities taking place in the Africa region. Of course, there's a rise in terrorism across the world. But our peculiar problem is the ISIS West Africa, which is the infiltration of many of the terrorists who came out of ISIS, but they are now functioning out of West Africa. Even worse is the fact that Libya, after the collapse of Gaddafi and the Gaddafi government, released and still continue to release large amounts of sophisticated weaponry which arms terrorism across Africa. The fourth is the problem of mass poverty. The problem of mass poverty. And let me give you some of the figures for our own country. The National Bureau of Statistics tells us that as of 1980, we had 17.1 million poor people, extremely poor. And that people who found it difficult to find food, shelter, and clothing. That's extreme poverty. 17.1 million as of 1980. By 1985, because these surveys are done in segments of about 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. By 1985, that number had risen to 34.7 million from 17.1 million. By 1992, the number had risen to 39.2 million. By 2004, the number had risen to 68.7 million. By 2010, the number had risen to 112.47 million of extremely poor people. The last survey was done in 112. We haven't done subsequent surveys. We have a World Bank survey that shows that poverty is now about 86 million. But we have the latest survey of the NBS is yet to come. But as of 2012, we had poverty figure of 112 million. 112 112.47 billion. Now, so in 1996, there were an estimated 67.1 million Nigerians living in absolute poverty. In 2004, the number moved up to 68.7 million. But by 2010, 2012, the most shocking thing happened. The number almost doubled to 112.47 million. What happened between 2004 and 2010? What happened? What is astonishing about the poverty situation is that it persisted even when the nation earned its highest revenues. The poverty figures increased despite the fact that the nation earned its highest revenues then. Now all of these figures, as I'm sure you know, are MBS figures and the World Bank figures, so we can verify and check all of them. But I want to give you some of the figures of oil earnings between 1990 and between 1990 and 2015. I want to give you some of the oil earnings just to demonstrate very clearly that despite rising oil figures, poverty continued to double and continued to increase. Between 1990 and 1998, Nigeria earned from oil $119.8 billion. $119.8 billion. That's between 1990 and 1998. That's an 8-year period. Between 1999 and 2009, the country earned $481 billion. That's between 1999 and 2009. $481 billion. Between 2010 and 2014, a 4-year period, 4 years, 2010 and 2014, the country earned $381 billion. That is the highest the country has ever earned, even in a 6-year period. We earned in a 4-year period, 2010 and 2014, more money than we had ever earned even 6 years before, 7 years before, 8 years before. In the 4 years, 2010 and 2014. $381 billion. Between 2015 and 2017 December, we have earned $94 billion. $94 billion. That's between 2015 and 2017 December. Now, up until first quarter of 2018, we've earned $112 billion. That's the lowest we've ever earned in any 3-year or 4-year period. I want to point out that if you take the period between 2010 and 2015, for most of that period, 2010 and 2015, Nigeria enjoyed an oil boom with oil prices hovering between $100 and $114 a barrel on the average. This is the period where we earned the highest amount from oil in any 4-year period. But our external reserves fell in that same period to 30 billion by the end of 2014. The number of out-of-school children as of 2015 was 10.3 million. And in that period, we piled up our highest debt in the nation's history. Let me give you a figure of the total debts, local and foreign. All of my presentation will be available. I'll give you a hard copy of the presentation so that everybody can go home and check the facts, just so that we're sure that what is being said is completely authentic. You have all the figures. Now, let me give you figures of the total debts, local and foreign, for federal government and the states from 2010 to date. 2010, our total debt as of 2010 was $35 billion. I'm going to leave out the small figures, $35 billion. 2011, it rose to $41 billion. 2012, it rose to $48 billion. 2013, it rose to $64 billion. 2015, it rose to $63 billion. So as of 2015, May 2015, our foreign debt in total, our debt, not foreign debt, our total debt, local government, state government, and federal government, aggregated, and I use the dollar figure because that's the figure that is used internationally. So our total debt as of 2015 stood at $63 billion. Today, it is $73 billion. The difference is $10 billion US dollars. What do these figures show? They show that when oil prices were at their highest, Between 2010 and 2014, the government was borrowing heavily. From 2010 to 2014, debts moved from 35 billion to 63 billion. When we assumed office in 2015, the debt that the previous government left was 63 billion US dollars. Today, 3.5 years later, we're at 73 billion. There are two reasons why, despite high earnings, we are poor. Why is it that despite high earnings, we are poor? I'm glad that we are here with intellectual creme de la creme of our nation, and we must be able to look at the issues very clearly and tell ourselves, without politics, what is going on? What is wrong? Why are we where we are? The first reason why, despite high oil earnings, we are poor is because of grant corruption, mismanagement of resources, and I'll explain. The difference between grant corruption and ordinary corruption. Let me just explain that. It's very important for us to understand. Let me explain the difference. Now, grant corruption is directly stealing from the CBN, from the central bank. Directly taking money from the treasury without any contract, no pretense. There's no contract. You just take money and you spend it and you share it. That was going on. And I've given several examples. Every time I talk about it, you hear the opposition shouting, yelling. But that's what was going on. When I got to office as vice president, I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe what was going on. In one day, $292 million US was signed out and taken and it disappeared. $292 million US. After that period, for 2 weeks, the Central Bank of Nigeria did not have cash dollars. The Central Bank did not have cash dollars. $292 billion US without any real explanation. Oh, they gave some. We later discovered, of course, what became of the money. But it's very clear that if you can move out, another occasion, 60 billion US was moved out ostensibly for security. That's 60 billion naira, 60 billion naira. Was moved out ostensibly for security purposes. But we know what happened. Defense contracts was over 2.5 billion. No explanation. Nobody knows what happened. But I'm talking here about grant corruption. So it is possible that where you have corrupt government, that the large sums of money which can be used for development is simply taken. That is a totally different type of corruption from corruption that's related to contracts, which is what I call and I just use the word ordinary, not because it is to be excused. No. It is because it's different from where you can just take money directly. If you are the president of Nigeria, you can literally say, go and bring money. And that's what happened. Look at the sum of 60 billion naira. When somebody can take 60 billion naira or 292 billion, that's almost 70 billion naira. $292 million. Today, our trader money scheme, where we're giving the petty traders a loan of 10,000, when they pay back, we give them 15, when they pay back, we give them 20. It's costing us 20 billion, 20. But somebody withdrew $292 million, almost 70 billion. If you had 70 billion, you will solve the problems of 7 million of those petty traders. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Those are the kind of contracts that we're trying to draw. Did you ever hear anybody criticize the withdrawal of $292 million? Today somebody is saying it's political to give to petty traders the bottom of the Nigerian pyramid money. The same thing will never $292 million disappear from the central bank. They didn't say what. They don't say a word. But we'll come back to that. The second reason why, despite high oil figures, there is still poverty. It's the fact that exploitation of natural resources and sharing of revenues is a failed approach, because the oil industry by itself does not produce any good number of jobs. As a matter of fact, the oil industry by itself produces very few jobs. Very, very few jobs. Oil revenues cannot solve the enormous problems we have. Productivity, creativity is the key. This is the reason why many countries that don't have any natural resources are productive. They are wealthy, much, much wealthier than countries that even have oil resources such as ourselves. The key is productivity. Each state must be productive, generating revenues from agriculture, from manufacturing, and from the knowledge economy. And we must empower the bottom of the pyramid. The poor. We must give resources to the petty traders, because that is the largest working population that we have. Those informal traders who are all over Nigeria, that's the largest. And nobody gives them any credit. Nobody gives them facilities, because people just fear, banks naturally fear that they won't be able to pay back. So government must, as a matter of policy, ensure that such access to credit, so that they can do better in their businesses. The so-called Meshai, Mesuya. But how do we achieve this? How do we achieve a situation where we are more productive, whether we have all resources or not, we're able to make the kind of money that benefits our people, from which we can tax, from which we can develop roads and infrastructure, and from which we can assure a future for our population? It is, as we have said, by restructuring. And that really, brings me to the center of the subject. It is by restructuring. What type of restructuring? I've argued elsewhere that the commonly held notion of restructuring, meaning geographical restructuring, will not achieve much. By that I mean that this should go back to the old regions or create more states. That will not solve our problem. Some people have said that we should go back to the old regions, Western region, Eastern region, Northern region. First of all, most of the states will not even agree to go back to any old arrangement. Once you're trying to get Ekiti state and Ondo state to merge again, or your state and Osun state to merge, you will never get any kind of joy. Nobody will agree to that. But that's only part of the problem. Assuming you were even able to get everybody to work together and form the region will have its own government. So you probably have a governor general or something. Then you have a legislature, adding more to the burden of government. Our problem is not in having more functionaries, one extra governor, another house of assembly, another judiciary. That's not the problem. In fact, that is one of our problems, is that the cost of governance is too high. There are too many people in public positions who are being paid money. That is one type. So in the national conference, I'm sure that some of us have had a look at the national conference conclusions. One of the conclusions they made at the national conference is that we should have 18 more states. We should create 18 more states. That was the recommendation of the national conference held in 2014. Can you imagine a situation where you have 18 more states to what we have at the moment? When we got into office in 2015, 23 states had not paid salaries. They were owing salaries between 3 months and 12 months. 23 states. So they were not even able to pay salaries. You now add 18 more to those states. Yes, you have 18 more governors, 18 more legislators, 18 more judiciaries. So, how does that solve our problem? How does that solve? As a matter of fact, we ask the problem. What we need to do and what we need to ensure happens is a restructuring that gives us stronger states. The states must be stronger. That is the type of restructuring that we need. I've spoken about this at the Lagos House of Assembly, the question of stronger states, and I'll just repeat some of the issues that I raised there. We've also, it is very clear that stronger states, more autonomous states, is what we need. Stronger states within a federation can, with the critical mass of resources they aggregate, solve the four problems I highlighted earlier. The problem of poverty, the problem of climate change, and all of the other problems that I've highlighted earlier. Stronger states that are more autonomous can do so. Now, what does this concept of stronger states mean? It means two things. The first is what states must do for themselves. What must the states themselves do? I mean the three arms of government in a state, the executive, judiciary, and legislature. But what must they do? They must work proactively and creatively as independent, administrative, and well-producing economic entities. Each state must become wealth-producing. Each state must produce its own wealth. Each state must be able to leverage on its strength to generate revenues for development. The second is the devolution of more power to the states, enabling the states to control more of their resources and make more of their own administrative decisions, such as the creation of local governments, the state and community police, including state prisons, creation of special courts and tribunals of equivalent jurisdiction to the high courts. The point I'm making is that the states must have more powers and more rights. I'll just give an example of what happened in the Western region. I'll give an example of what happened in the Western region. The phenomenal achievements of the Western regional government of Chief Obafemi Awolowo in 6 years illustrates how the convergence of the two imperatives that I've mentioned earlier, the two imperatives being what the states can do for themselves and greater power to the state. Those are the two imperatives. What these two imperatives can do to transform the socio-economic destiny of millions. Chief Obafemi Awolowo was premier of the Western region of Nigeria from 1954 to 1960. Now the Western region is what today constitutes Oyo, Ogun, Ondo, Ekiti, Osun, parts of Kwara, Kogi, Edo and Delta, and Lagos as far as Jibo, Agege, etc. Now that 6-year period of the Awolowo government is often cited as one of the most progressive of any government in the developing world. Some of the major accomplishments include a major agricultural revolution, government supporting and subsidizing cash crop production, using commodity exchanges to enhance agribusiness, several farm settlements, several agro-allied and other industries, rural textile, Agro-Ekiti, Okutikupa, oil palm mills, Oduwa glass, Ifon ceramics, Ire-Ekiti, bridge industry, as well as several industrial estates and parks, including the Ikeja Industrial Estate, a network of roads across the region, the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, the 26-story Cocoa House in Ibadan, Airport Hotel in Kenya, Western Nigeria Television, first of its kind, first in Africa, even ahead of many European countries, including Belgium, and of course ahead of South Africa. But by far the most significant achievement of the Awolowo government was free universal primary education. In 1952, when the scheme was proposed, 381,000 children were enrolled in school. By 1955, when the scheme took off, 811,432 children were enrolled in school, and the numbers continue to grow. The government devoted as much as 41.2% of the 1958-1959 recurrent budget to education at that time, 41.2%, one of the highest in the world at that time. At the same time, the region nurtured a vibrant civil service and a judicial system, which is widely acknowledged as a model even today. So how were our phenomenal achievements possible? There was no oil revenue. There was no federal revenue. In fact, the Western region and all the other regions gave revenue to the federal government. It was the other way around. They gave revenue to the federal government. How did they do it? How was I able to do it? Mostly taxes, taxes, individuals and revenues from agriculture. Mostly revenue from agriculture and some mining. Mostly taxes. Free education, which was audaciously launched by the Awolowo government, was directly on the back of income taxes. A capitation of poll tax was imposed by the Western Region government, mainly to fund free education, despite much opposition and protests. For those who follow political history, Awolowo lost elections in the West, on the federal elections, that is, in the West, on account of his insistence on free education. That kind of political courage is always difficult to find these days. But that is the cost of leadership. If you look at what was achieved at that time, and this is the point that we're making, that the states, as they are presently constituted today, the same land mass, now with better educated people, with more infrastructure, with more people working, we do not generate enough taxes to even pay for education, to even pay salaries. The same land area, can produce more agriculturally now because we have more equipment, we have more everything. So when we talk about restructuring, we must ask ourselves the question, what type of restructuring? The restructuring that we need is obviously the type that enables us to develop our own states in the same way that the Western region, the Northern region, Eastern region were able to develop their territories without oil revenues. Without oil revenues. Today, everybody depends on oil. Every month, the state government gather in Abuja, and the federal administration is here. So the truth is that a combination of visionary leadership and strong autonomous states is the winning formula for economic development. And that's really as simple as it is. Awolowo was also a visionary leader, but he had an autonomous region behind him. Today, most states of Nigeria do not generate, as I've said, enough IGR in 1 year to pay salaries for a month. They don't generate enough revenue in a whole year to pay salaries for a month. In fact, Lagos State, which is by far the most productive of the states, earns enough IGR. It earns more IGR than 31 states put together. I'm not sure whether we should be clapping. Because really, I mean, if one state and earn 31 and earn what 31 states put together, it's a big problem. It means that only 5 states are even earning anything worth talking about. Most states are earning far too little to even support their own administration, to even support just themselves, just supporting even payment of their own salaries. I'm talking about payment of taxes, and this is very important about payment of taxes because all of us who are here are the Nigerian elite. Our tax to GDP is still under 10%. As a matter of fact, now it's probably close to 8%. It used to be 6%. Probably closer to 8% now. And whatever statistics, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, the statistics tell us that only 914 Nigerians pay self-assessed tax of over 10 million naira. I want to repeat that so we understand it well. Only 914, not 914,000, 914, less than 1,000 people in Nigeria pay self-assessed taxes of up to 10 million naira in 1 year. Of that 914, 912 of them are in Lagos. The other 2 are in Yoruba State. Nobody else is paying more than 10 million naira in assessment. Now, if you have that kind of tax efficiency, we all know that there are hundreds of thousands of people who should be paid more than 10 million naira in taxes in 1 year. But only 914. Only 914. And of that number, the vast majority are here. Only two I know the state. I think I can say for myself that I belong to both. At least I am a citizen of Lagos and Ogun State. Well, for the rest of us, I think we have to decide what's happening in your state. But the process of creating stronger subnationals is possible. Because we've talked about two things. We've said that we need to do two things. One, we need to create autonomous, strong states. We need to do that. That's one of the critical things that we need to do. But also, we have said that we must devolve power to those states as part of building strong states. But we must also ensure that even at state level, states themselves are productive. The states must be productive. The states must, in the same way that the Western region and all the other work hard, collect their tax, ensure that taxes are collected. In that case, if we collect more taxes, of course, if we devolve, if we allow people to keep their taxes, especially income tax, to make life better. But we need to ensure that taxes are collected. We need to ensure that we generate income. And then, of course, the states must be stronger. But the point I'm also making is that even today, despite the fact that we haven't done any major constitutional changes, it is possible for us to have stronger states. It's possible for us to have more autonomous states, despite the fact that we have not yet made a major constitutional change. And I think that even within our current legislative and constitutional framework, we can still have stronger states. In the period when we started civilian administration from 1999, I had the privilege of working in the government of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu here in Lagos as Attorney General. And in that period, and also to date, the government of Lagos State, working closely with the State House of Assembly at the time, challenged the federal government and the National Assembly before the Supreme Court, in several cases, designed to deepen the autonomy of states. In other words, in that period, 1999 to 2007 and even beyond, I'll show that even beyond that, there are several other things that Lagos State government in particular has done. In that period, what Lagos State achieved was to achieve a restructuring by litigation. By litigation, Lagos State government was able to achieve a lot of what we're describing today as restructuring of the things that we're looking for just by going to court, by challenging the federal government, by challenging the plenitude of federal government's powers at the Supreme Court. And I'll give a few examples of that. And to show us that by litigation, by going to court, by the states challenging the federal government in court, we can achieve a lot of what we want to achieve by way of restructuring. I'll give a few examples. One of the first things that we argued about is that states can, by virtue of their houses of assembly, create their own local governments. That's a very important part of autonomy. If I'm an administration of the state, I should be able to create the local government I want. If I want 30, I should create 30. If I want to reduce the number, I should reduce the number. Because the local governments are administrative units of the state, and we should be able to decide how many we want or how few we want. However, after the creation of the state of the local government by law, the state must go a step further by submitting returns to the National Assembly, which in turn would list the new local government area in the Constitution. It is because the states can create their own local government that the Lagos State government at the time took the position that it could hold elections to the LCDAs and that it created the LCDA by law. But again, in consultation with the State House of Assembly, we agreed at the time to create, to set up LCDAs by law and to empower the LCDA to function administratively, but also to be capable of rendering the sort of services that local governments can render. The important point to be made is that after the Supreme Court had said that state governments can create local government, we have not backtracked on that. And even up until today, state governments have maintained that position. And just to reiterate the point, we went to the Supreme Court after we created 37 new local governments. The federal government argued under President Obasanjo that we had no right to create local governments. And President Obasanjo at the time stopped allocation to the state because we had created 37 local governments. We challenged it at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court agreed with us that we had every right to create local governments. But that after we created local governments, our local governments had to be listed at the National Assembly. But that by law, every state had the right to create local governments. When the Supreme Court returned its verdict, we then by law created the LCDAs, those that we have today, and allowed the LCDAs to essentially perform the functions of local government. The second point, which we asserted at the Supreme Court, is that the Constitution intends that everything relating to local governments must be in the province of the state government, rather than in that of the state government. The National Assembly has no power under any provision of the Constitution to increase or alter the tenure of elected officials of local government councils. Only the House of Assembly of the state has such a power. In other words, we said that if we want our local governments to have 5-year terms rather than 3-year terms, we can by state law do so. Federal government cannot alter the tenure of local government chairman. We went to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court agreed with us. Now we had every right to determine the tenure of our local government chairman. This is establishing the autonomy of the states, establishing the power of the states to administratively control their own resources and control their administrative units. The third point, which we took to the Supreme Court and won, is that a state has exclusive legislative and executive authority over urban and regional planning functions. Even with respect to state lands in states, the federal government must seek building or other development control permits from the state. It is to the effect that the state has exclusive authority to make laws on urban and regional planning. Even where federal land is concerned, the federal government must still go back to the state. And I want to explain that point so that we understand it very clearly. Because they just simply say, this is federal land. We can issue our permits for federal land. So even if they like, they should want it. They will decide, well, the whole of Ikoyi or Victoria land, a lot of that is federal land. Let us issue permits as we like. We took them to court and said, no, it is the state government that has the power to give construction permits. It's the state government that has the power to give development control permits, even over federal land. So we went to the Supreme Court to say that even where the federal government owns a piece of land, they cannot build on it unless the state government gives them permission to do so. And the Supreme Court agreed with us that they cannot do so unless they seek the permission of the state government. So today the law is that even over federal land, it is only the state government that can give construction permits. So we deepened in that way. We deepened the power of the state, the autonomous power of the state, the power of the state to remain autonomous, even over the federal government in specific situations. The fourth is that the president, the fourth point which we took to the Supreme Court, and this was in relation to this our local government, but a very important point emerged, is that the president of Nigeria has no power, however good his reasons may be, to seize or withhold the statutory allocation of a state or local government. No matter how good his reasons may be, the president of Nigeria cannot say that because I suspect that you people are going to waste the money or you are stealing the money, I'm not going to give you your allocation. He has no right to do so. The federal government of Nigeria stopped our own allocation when we created local government. And we took them to court. We went to the Supreme Court and said, no, the autonomy of states guarantees that we are sharers. All of us, state government, local government, you come to the table with the federal government to share federal allocation. State government is not, the federal government is not the father. It's not a father that can decide, hey guys, you don't like what you are doing, to hold your pocket money until next time. We took the president to court and challenged him, and the Supreme Court held that indeed the federal government or the president had no such power. no power whatsoever to withhold our allocation. Although we didn't get our allocation back until we left office, but at least we firmly established the principle, and that principle endures up until today. If you just permit me to consider the next ruling of the Supreme Court in some detail, just to demonstrate the extensive powers of state legislatures, especially over the supervision of statutory allocations. There was a case also that we took to the Supreme Court. This was the monitoring of revenue allocated to local government councils from the Federation account. In 2005, May 2005, the National Assembly passed a law with the title Monitoring of Revenue Allocation to Local Government Act of 2005. The law established a monitoring committee for funds allocated to local governments and required each state to give an account of how it expended local government allocations to the Accountant General of the Federation. We challenged that. In Lagos State, we went to court, went to the Supreme Court and challenged it. In the lead judgment of the Supreme Court, Honorable Justice Nikitopi of Blessed Memory took time to explain the practical implications of the principle of federalism in our constitution. And he said, and I quote, he said, federalism as a viable concept of organizing a pluralistic society, such as Nigeria, for governments, does not encourage so much power, so much concentration of power at the center. Each of the federating units must be independent and coordinated. Each of them exists not as an appendage of the other, but as an autonomous entity in the sense of being able to exercise its own will in the conduct of its affairs, free from direction from another government. Then his lordship contrasted that with unitarism. He said unitarism is an arrangement where the constitution concentrates power at the center or at the national level. A very strong central command, making the regions or groups parasitic on the center, in the sense that they do not enjoy any autonomy. This is the way that the Supreme Court described this is so important, because some people today who are talking of this company don't even understand the extent to which we have gone in the process. They don't even know where we are. They just talk about it. They don't even know what has gone on, what has taken place. The Supreme Court has clearly spoken about the extent of the powers of autonomy or the autonomous rights of states. The Supreme Court has already told us that we are not in a unitary state. As much as possible, we should be capable of functioning as independent and autonomous units within the province of the law. Of course, we want to increase that autonomy, but we must know where we're at today. We must understand where we're at today, so that this argument of restructuring takes on a much more intelligent process, a much more intelligent process. Because we don't be saying restructuring. Where are we in that process? In any event, restructuring is an evolutionary process. You cannot restructure in one day. We move from regions to 12 states. We restructured to 19. Now we are 36. We're now talking of deepening that, the autonomy of states. I must understand where we are. The Lagos State Legislature has in the tradition of establishing and pushing the frontiers of federalism by legislation and litigation, have done a lot and has made many strides. I must give the example of Lagos State just to keep it within, because most of us live here. In more recent times, Lagos State government passed something called the Hotel Occupancy and Restaurant Consumption Tax Law. In that law, Lagos State government accepted its autonomy by saying that we are in control of entertainment in our state. Hotels and restaurants are under our government. And they imposed a 5% tax on sales in hotels and restaurants. This was passed by the House. The federal government challenged it. The federal government went to court and said Lagos State government had no right as a state to pass a law. But the Supreme Court declared the law valid because matters of hotel and consumption tax generally are state affairs. So the Lagos State government, by passing that law, clearly showed that we have a right to manage our hotels and collect our taxes and respect to consumption taxes and hotel taxes. Also, the Lagos State in 2006 passed the Lagos State Internal Revenue Administration Law as the LRS law for the first time. Aside from several structural changes brought about by the law, it granted the LRS autonomy from the civil service such that its remuneration and disciplinary processes were more business-like. One of the very important things that the LRS achieved, because all of that was passed when our resources were seized, when our money was seized by the federal government. Once our money was seized, we realized that we would either swim or we would sink. We had to find a way. So we reformed our tax system ourselves. We had to think through it. We couldn't have a tax system that was just wasting resources. We couldn't have a tax system that was just corrupt. We had to reform our tax system. We passed the law, making it autonomous, giving those who are collecting taxes bonuses so that they will collect taxes more effectively. We reformed the entire thing, and we saw the difference. When we got into office in 1999, IGR in Lagos was 600 million. For almost 2 years, 600 million naira. Today is in the order of about 33 billion. This same state, this same land area. But the difference, first of all, is in realizing that your destiny is in your own hands. That's the difference. That's what made our different. That's why our was able to do the things he did in the Western region. Because he took the destiny of the Western region in its own hands. The people of the state and the elite of the state decided we're going to go forward and we're going to do the right thing. And that made the difference. The Lagos State government also, through the Lagos State House of Assembly, passed the Waterways Authority Act. In passing that Waterways Authority Act, they modified the National Inland Waterways Authority Act of 2004. The law established the Lagos State Waterways Authority and saddled the agency with the regulation and management of internal waterways of Lagos State. Now that's a very important legislation also. And also it's also one of those assertive positions that the Lagos State government has taken. But the Lagos State government decided that we're going to manage our own internal waterways. It's important because there's already a National Inland Waterways Act, which is the act of the federal government. But the Lagos State government said, no, our internal waterways should be our concern. Federal government cannot regulate internal waterways. You're supposed to regulate waterways between states that go from one state to the other. But internally, we must regulate our lagoons. It's up to us to do so. So a law was passed. When that law was passed, the federal government challenged. The High Court upheld the position of the federal government. But the Court of Appeal has since reversed it and has upheld the position that the Lagos State law has every right to pass a law to regulate its internal waterways. So as of today, that law stands. And this is the way by which very seriously and very progressively the Lagos State government has achieved, not just for itself, by the way, every one of the decisions that the Lagos State government has obtained from the Supreme Court applies to all states of the Federation. So it's not just Lagos State making the progress. By ensuring that we put our resources where our mouth is, we have been able to do more for autonomy of states and restructuring than some who would just talk about it. Because at the same time, when we were pushing all this, there was a government in place between 1999 and 2007. And there are some gentlemen who are in that government who today are talking about restructuring. But who are opposing us every step of the way then. I know you know some of those gentlemen. Or at least you know one of them. On the security question, we must establish the state police. There's no question at all about that. No matter how we slice it, we cannot run away from state police. We cannot. Today, the challenges that we're facing across the nation, especially many of the security challenges, are challenges that can be addressed by the state. Sometimes at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., I get a call. Calabar State, I get a call from them or wherever. There's an attack on their way, there's this happening and all of that. It is the federal police. You have to deploy policemen to farthest portions of this country. That cannot work. You cannot have a federation of 200 million people. You cannot have border towns all over the place, and the states do not control their own police. There must be state police. That doesn't mean there will not be federal police. The federal police will remain, especially for inter-border crimes, for things like elections, for all sorts of policing, smuggling, and all of those kinds of things. But you must still have community policing. You must still have states police themselves. Today, many of the state governments pay for police operations anyway. Lagos State Police has a security trust fund headed by, at some point, by Mr. Bola Adewale, who is here with us. And that just shows you that whether we like it or not, it is the states that are even paying anyway for most of the operations of the police. So we must have community police, we must have state police, we must have state penitentiaries as well, state prisons as well. And you cannot say that the governor is the chief security officer of the state when he has no control over security in the state. So there is a strong case to be made, and we can argue however we like. But the most important thing is that we must come to that. We require a constitutional amendment. I know that there is legislation already before the National Assembly. But these are the very important issues that we have to deal with. I'm going to leave a lot of my other, I'll leave the presentation with you so that we can move on. But we've also talked quite a bit in my the paper that I presented. I've talked quite a bit about the eradication of poverty, about what we need to do, because restructuring is also very important on the issue of eradication of poverty. Eradication of poverty, when we talk about that in the document, is so critical to whatever it is we choose to do in our country. So we've got to deal with issues around education. And I've talked extensively about STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, and maths, and some of the new ideas, the new curriculum that is being developed now, in consultation with the state governments, how we can bring young people into the knowledge economy to start teaching the right things and the right way from primary school all of the way up. Of course, you know that education is state government control, especially primary and secondary state government control. But we cannot leave the state governments on their own. And that's why we're jointly working on the new curriculum, currently working on teacher training. Teacher training is so crucial. We cannot have teachers the same way that they've been trained all this time. And we've seen so many examples in the different states where you have teachers who are not even well educated enough to pass some of the exams of the classes that they teach. So there are problems with teacher education. And the federal government, we've been working a lot with the state government, at the NEC, which is the National Economic Council, our monthly meetings with the state governments. And I have the privilege of chairing that. And we work, we've been working extensively on education, also on healthcare. For the first time this year, we are spending 1% of our consolidated revenue fund on healthcare. That's the first time in the history of the country that we're actually able to spend 1% of CRA on healthcare. And that's a crucial landmark because we've been spending far too little on healthcare. We have to spend more on healthcare. But where we're going is national health insurance, especially the co-payments issue. And I'm sure that we'll see a lot of that in the full paper when we're giving copies of it. The last point I want to make is dealing with the job creation issue. How do we deal with this issue of job creation? What is going to happen? Because no matter how we slice it, one of the most important problems that we have and we will have is that of creating jobs for young people. And just as I said earlier, we are growing at a rate of almost 3% every year. The meaning of that is that we will be the most populous country in the world. With the third most populous country, will be number 3 in the world after China and India. by 2050. Every year, we're moving closer and closer to become the most populous nation, or one of the most populous 3 nations in the world. The biggest problem of that is how to make sure that young people are engaged. How do we make sure that they're engaged? How do we make sure that the majority of our people have the resources, have what they require to be able to manage their own lives, to live decent lives, have homes for themselves, schools for their children, healthcare, etc. As I mentioned earlier, the APC, when we were looking at issues around the manifesto, many arguments came on how to deal with questions of job creation. How do we deal with questions of job creation going 10 years down the road? I have the privilege of being part of the thing that drew up the manifesto and the 10-year plan of the party. We realized that we had to take a bottom-up approach. Now, this bottom-up approach is very important. This is one where government itself intervenes by massive social investment program. This sort of program addresses youth, especially graduate employment, and then credit to small businesses, but especially credit to the smallest businesses, the one-table trader, the bread or plantain seller, etc. Let me just explain very quickly what that means. When you look at the way our budgets are usually framed, our budgets are usually framed in a way that addresses only the top segment of the society. In other words, we look at what to do for industry, we look at what to do for manufacturing at those high levels. But the question remains that we have a very large number of people who are in the formal trade. The traders, the market women, and all that. Huge number. A lot of these people are not usually addressed in our budgets, and they are the vast majority of our people. The second point is that even with respect to manufacturing, with respect to industry and all that, we do not take a job creation approach. In other words, we are not supporting those industries that create the most jobs. And it's important that we support the industries that create the most jobs. It's important that we put money in agriculture, that we invest in agriculture, that we put our resources in the knowledge economy, in technology, etc. That we fund those industries that produce the largest amount of jobs. And also that we give credit to people about that. One of the ways is by ensuring that through what we call our G program, Government Enterprise and Entrepreneurship Program, we started giving microcredit, something called market money, of between 50,000 and 350,000 to market women, artisans, and people like that. We gave out about 400,000, so about 400,000, we're looking at giving to 1 million. I think we'll be closer to 600,000 now. But that was very, very small, considering the resources that were available. But then we graduated also to trader money, which is giving the smallest, the bottom of the pyramid, enough money to improve their inventory. When you look at what some of these people sell in their trades or tabletops, the total inventory they have is not more than 3,000 naira, 4,000 naira. But they are making a living from it. What we then decided is that we must supplement what they have so that they can buy more, do more, and earn more for themselves. And we worked out that model. We looked at several other models, India, Brazil, several models of putting money in the hands of traders, putting money in the hands of artisans, and ensuring that artisans and traders are empowered. When we give them 10,000 naira, they pay back, we give them 15, they pay back, we give them 20, then they graduate into market. And we found that the return rate, their repayment rate is very high, extremely high. They are able to pay back, and they make sure they pay back because they know they are going to get more money when they pay back. And we're able to make progress that way with them. Some of the arguments have been raised by, sometimes in Nigerian elite, we get carried away by our own issues. Oh, they said that's a waste of money. How can you be giving people 10,000 or 15,000 and all that? I said, let's first unpack this and understand what we're able to do. In 2010, 2009 to 2011, about 300 Nigerians owed the banks 5 major banks. And the banks were about to collapse. The federal government then bailed out these individuals and the banking system. They spent 5.7 trillion naira. 5.7 trillion naira. Today, our budget is 8.6 trillion. Just to understand what we're talking about here. We have not spent 500 billion, not 1 trillion, on the entire social investment program. But we built out 300 of the Nigerian elite and the bank with 5.7 trillion. That's the kind of distortion that makes it difficult for us to do well. Because we've got to understand what we're dealing with. If we put 1 trillion behind a social investment program, put money and resources in the hands of traders, farmers, artisans, carpenters, retraining them. Today we're employing 500,000 graduates in our Empower program. 500,000 graduates, all of that, we still haven't spent 60 billion. All of that. If we employ a million more, if we employ 500,000 more to make a million, we'll be spending close to about maybe 100 billion. We'll spend about, we'll spend 30 billion a month. In 12 months, that will be 360 billion. Still under 500 billion. If we employ a million Nigerian people under an Empower program, double the number. But we build that. 300 people with 5.7 trillion. These are the kinds of things that we must understand as we think and as we plan. It is not a lack of resources. It is proper planning, understanding first of all that we cannot allow people to steal our money, and then secondly, putting the resources to support them. One of the things, ways by which we're empowering the traders and artisans is by what we call energizing economies, putting power in the markets and economic clusters. So we're putting power, we put power in Sabongari market in Kano, Ariarian market in Aba, the GCON market in Ondo State. There are 3 markets where we put power in 3 markets in Ondo State. Recently, Sura market in Lagos, we put solar power there as well. Now these are power projects that enable those markets and those market people, tailors, artisans and all of that, to have power 24/7. They are far more productive. They are able to produce more and they are able to pay more taxes. But they pay for the power. It's not free. And they are happy to pay for the power because it's much cheaper anyway than using generators. So by putting our resources, supporting small businesses, supporting microcredit and all of that, we're able to do more. We're able to create a situation where even the states benefit a great deal more and are able to put their resources to better use. I think I will leave throughout this point, but just to say again how very deeply grateful I am for the opportunity to come here and speak. Thank you very much.